If there's three things you can be sure about on this here planet Earth, it's that the sky is blue, the grass is green, and zombie movies never go out of fashion. I feel like most people at some point in their lives have thought about what they'd do in a zombie outbreak, like where they'd go, what weapons they'd use, who they'd leave behind, and how far they would go to stockpile. But here we are, literally living in a pandemic, and who would have thought that the scariest thing about it would be not being able to wipe your own bum. So with literally hundreds of zombie films at our disposal, there's one we keep coming back to, even after a whopping 43 years since it was made, and that is Dawn of the Dead. In 1967, a group of people came together to make a little horror film led by a man named George A. Romero. Little did they know how much of a cultural impact it would have, changing the landscape of cinema forever, and how in 2021 an internet dork would be talking about it in a YouTube video. But it's the grey-faced big brother we're here to talk about, the inevitable sequel that went bigger and a little bit goofier. And I have to be honest, it's that combination of horror and humour that really made this one my favourite of the trilogy. I feel like it's the full package, a 70s living dead bonanza extravaganza! Even right from the get-go, I feel like we're dropped straight into hell with this red wall filling the screen. Poor Franny is having the nightmare of her life.
You alright?
It's quite clear that the world is going to shit, and like most zombie films, it's usually the people that are the problem. It doesn't take long for things to get bloody, and we get to see what happens when you give Super Mario a gun.
Feeling good, let's go! Bye bye! Mamma mia, the horror!
Once we've been introduced to all the main characters, they come together to fly away in the whirly bird, seeking refuge, seeking a new life. You see, for me, this is usually my favourite part of zombie films, the searching for safe haven and the pit stops along the way. I love watching how society deals with the outbreak, but you've got this lot treating it like a bloody game.
Got him!
I like how this helicopter fueling scene puts all the characters in their own dangerous predicaments, like Peter dealing with the zombie children, which you don't see that often in zombie films. Yeah, well that one doesn't count because that's blatantly an old man hiding inside a child.
Wait a second.
And then we've got Flyboy who has a tussle with the undead.
Give the fuck up! Stop doing that dumbass shit!
Actually, this scene also reminds me of Night of the Living Dead with Johnny and Barbara in the graveyard. Roger doesn't even realise what's behind him. And look at this guy's head. You know, he looks really familiar actually. Where have I seen him before with that big old Lego bonce?
Carry on screaming!
After flying around with nowhere to go, they finally come across the ultimate hideout, the shopping mall. As a kid, I'd often fantasise about having my local shopping mall all to myself, wondering what I'd do first with all that freedom. Romero really manages to capture that childlike sense of fun here. The zombies always dancing that fine line of being somewhat comical but also extremely deadly. But not quite Flyboy with a gun deadly.
Team Deathmatch.
Peter, my God, what are you doing?
For me, this film has two distinct halves. The first half, whilst pretty grim, has a sort of optimism to it, seeing the potential of their new home, exploring it with them, and watching them adapt, which is really fun. The second half for me starts when Roger gets bitten. Damn! I always used to dread the movement of the trucks because from here, the mood starts to slowly decline. No matter how hard they try to be happy, you can't help but feel the optimism fade. There's a real bleakness watching them try and live normal yet unfulfilling lives in these big open spaces devoid of life. And always being reminded that death is just around the corner. The bikers make for a great climax to the film with loads of creative kills by both the living and the dead. And it's so gutting when Steven gets attacked in the lift, but it makes for such an iconic scene and it gives us hands down the best zombie of the movie. And after all that effort for Flyboy to get home,
Does somebody not know how to flush a toilet after they've had a shit?
and what could have been a really depressing ending with Peter blowing his brains out and Fran throwing herself into the helicopter blades actually turns into a finale of hope, flying off into the dawn of the dead. Whilst it's quite obvious that the film hasn't aged well cosmetically, it still holds up for everything else that it represents. It's easy to see its relevance in modern times. It's hard not to. And you know what? The 2004 remake wasn't that bad either.
I've just been informed that we are going off the air.
George Romero's passing in 2017 sent shockwaves across the horror community. He was such a staple in the genre and he's largely responsible for a lot of the horror films you see today. And whilst his later movies were a little disappointing,
Oh, yuck.
it's very easy to forgive him because he gave us so much. I, for one, am going to miss hearing about a new George A. Romero film. And did I mention we were best buds? When I first met him, our meeting went a lot like this. And finally, it would be rude of me not to mention some of the physical media that came from Dawn of the Dead, like this beautiful VHS release. There has been so many releases over the years with the different cuts of the film, but my god, if this isn't the definitive release of the film, then I don't know what is. Dawn of the Dead has never looked and sounded so good in glorious 4K. And so, the legacy lives on. The more we talk about these movies, the more chance they get to stay alive and haunt future generations. But by that point, we might have all turned into brain dead zombies ourselves. Only time will tell.